to to wholesalers or retailers po.
Mm-hmm. So, first is the parts division, and second is the aftermarket division. Right? Sorry, ano ba ito? Tayo na to? Okay. So, again, so you have the parts division. So there are three parts divisions actually, right? Ignition, transmission, and what's the third one? Engine. Engine parts. There are three divisions. Okay. Second, so three divisions yan. And then you have one division called the aftermarket division, and all of these have specific customers. So your three parts divisions, ang customers nila are OEMs. And for aftermarket, it's retail or wholesale pero in essence, consumer market. Okay. What are OEMs? Can you describe what OEMs are? Anyone? Iba naman. Anyone? Can you describe what OEMs are? Original Equipment Manufacturers. Ano-ano yan? Sino-sino yan? Ano example? Yes, Joel.
Sir, I'll just try from what I searched yesterday.
Go
So
ahead.
basically, OEMs or original equipment manufacturers are companies who outsource their materials from different companies and then create their own product from the purchased material. So siguro I think an example would be Apple, who purchases the for example their iPhone. They purchase the materials for that in different countries like I think Taiwan, and then they use those materials to create the iPhone itself, which is a separate product that they sell.
All right.
So something
So,
like that.
original equipment manufacturers are correct. Joel is correct. In the example of say iPhone, the specific parts, hindi naman yan lahat binili ng iPhone. No, yung tornilyo or yung specific speaker. No, those are all outsourced from somewhere else, right? And Abrams company is the kind of company which sells parts to a manufacturer that assembles it and then that assembles something to make a different product out of the parts that you sold. No? In this case, yung original equipment manufacturers here, they are selling ignition parts, transmission parts, and engine parts. So let's look at engine parts. Okay? Yung engine manufacturers, right? So for example, Rolls-Royce is an engine manufacturer aside from in the context of airplanes, for example. Okay? In the context of airplanes, the airplane manufacturer itself is say Boeing, right? The engine can be Rolls-Royce engine. Okay? Within the engine, okay, may mga parts yan, may tornilyo or may specific elements of the Rolls-Royce engine itself. No? And Rolls-Royce buys it from another buys it from another company. That company is Abrams. Ganun siya, no? It sells since ang sinisell lang niya is engine parts, not the engine itself, right? So nagsisell siya to an engine manufacturer. The engine manufacturer assembles the engine, sells it to the airline company. The airline company, not airline, airplane manufacturer. Okay? The airplane manufacturer assembles the airplane and sells it to or leases it out to an airline. Okay? So parang nasa bottom of the food chain, the Abrams company, right? Because it has to manufacture specific parts for engine na i-renta ng engine manufacturer to an airplane or an automobile company or a truck manufacturing company or a bus company in this case. Okay? So, yun ang market ng OEM. Right? So, therefore, what kind of market is the OEM market? It is a business market. Right? Ang kanyang customer are businesses. So the OEM divisions are B2B divisions, right? On the other hand, ano yung aftermarket? Siyempre, kailangan ng spare parts later. So pag nagbenta na ng kotse, kailangan ng spare parts. Okay? The spare parts can be sold by the aftermarket division. Saan binibenta? Sa general market na. So pwede sa mga taga-maintain ng cars, pwede sa general public kasi pwede na bumili ng parts ng general public, di ba? So that's what essentially is the aftermarket. After sales market for parts. And since it sells to consumers in general, right? It's a B2C kind of business. Right? So fundamentally, magkaiba na sila. The B2B and the B2C businesses of the parts divisions and the aftermarket division. Okay? So yun ang essentially organization, business makeup of Abrams company. Now, my next question is, in the case it mentions that there are different key success factors with respect to with respect to these divisions, right? We will expect that they have different key success factors or critical success factors. Bakit? Kasi syempre, yung OEM, ang customer niya, businesses, ang decision making ng businesses iba sa decision making ng consumers, right? That's something that you know from your marketing or strategy classes. Okay? So let's try to understand what are the key success factors for the two markets, OEM and AM. So can someone discuss what are the critical success factors in the OEM divisions and the AM divisions? Anyone? Yes, go ahead.
Hello, sir. Am I audible?
Yep.
Yeah, so I think the key success factors for the OEM is that they should have the ability to design or innovate. They should also meet delivery schedules, and they have good controlling costs. And then for the AM, I think what they value is the availability, and then after that is quality and the price of what's being sold.
Okay, wait lang, hinahinay. So for OEM, ability to design and innovate, deliver on time, and what's the third one?
Delivery on time and controlling costs, sir.
Controlling costs. So this was identified by management na itong key success factors in the OEM division. For AM, ano daw yung critical success factors?
For the AM, I think it's the availability first of the product or the parts, and then the quality and the price.
Quality and
The price.
price. So those are the critical success factors according to the case, no? For Abrams company. Okay? Why is it important for us to identify the critical success factors of these businesses? Why do you think that that's needed for us to define it in the context of general or for the context of designing its management control system? Go ahead, Nico.
For me, sir, I think it's important because a lot of management's strategies will be patterned after trying to meet these different goals for the different subdivisions, especially because this business is segmented to mainly meet B2B and B2C at the same time. So if they're able to, I guess, describe and be able to clearly disseminate what OEM and AM is specifically looking for, then it's a lot easier for the employees to follow the general corporate strategy and also, I guess, have motivation to deliver for the firm.
Yep. So very critical for in an organization to define what success looks like because yun yung kailangan nating marating after 1 year after implementing the strategy, right? At strategy, like there's an end game, right? Anong klaseng organization na ang organization mo after implementation of strategy. And these are very important because these are what enable you to reach your endpoint. in implementation of strategy. Parang ito yung bridge, right? From point A to point B, or the road between point A and point B, right? So ito lang yung strategies of an organization, right? What should happen para marating nila yung kanilang desired outcome or desired future. Okay? And defining this is very important, as mentioned by Nico, because the markets are different. And because the markets are different, how we reach the end point of the strategy is different also, because these different markets have different ways to decide kung kailan sila bibili sa'yo. Right? And for OEM, it is ability to design and innovate, deliver on time, and control costs. Obviously, controlling costs is very important because you're dealing with the business, and the business that's your counterparty. And so therefore, businesses are also concerned about controlling costs. Okay. Something that we should also understand in terms of the OEM market is, what did I say? Ang kanilang market is businesses, right? And they sell to engine manufacturers, for example. The engine division sells parts to the engine manufacturers. You think maraming engine manufacturers? Konti lang yan, right? So therefore, if you want to apply the Porter by forces on that, you know, since there are only a few engine manufacturers, I would imagine, right? What do they have? What kind of power do they have? Itong mga OEMs na ito, since kokonti lang sila, right? So they have a higher bargaining power in terms of bargaining power of customers in this case, right? Kasi remember, Abrams sells to an engine manufacturer, which sells to an automobile manufacturer, for example, right? This engine manufacturer, medyo mas generic yung kanyang needs, for example. Okay? And so therefore can easily switch. Oops. Wait lang. How do I... Okay? And easy to switch. Okay? Kasi mas generic yung ginagawa ng Abrams kaysa na sa engine manufacturer. Kasi engine manufacturer, siya may technology, parts lang kailangan niya kay Abrams. So, pwede maraming gumawa ng parts. Okay? So, easy to substitute. Also, aside from easy to substitute, probably order sizes are high or malalaki yung order size. Kung malalaki yung order size, definitely, Abrams is more beholden to its customers. Diba? Kasi malaki yung cost of pull-out as far as Abrams is concerned. So, because of this, I'm sure a lot of emphasis is on controlling costs. Okay? Kasi ang characteristic ng Porter's five forces is that pag strong ang bargaining power ng customers, nasi-squeeze ang gross margin. Nasi-squeeze ang profitability ng segment na yan. Kaya sinasabi, in the case that the profit margins of OEM is actually smaller than the profit margins of EM, because there is more greater bargaining power of customers as far as the OEM division is concerned. On the part of AM, what are the success factors? Availability of parts and quality and price. Okay, first, availability of parts. Obviously, dapat mataas ang availability of parts in the market where AM is. Okay, parang FMCG lang yan. Right? Fast-moving consumer goods. Diba? Fast-moving consumer goods like Procter & Gamble, for example. Success factor in fast-moving consumer goods is coverage. Meaning, available ba yung type sa mga supermarket? Or available ba yung type sa mga sari-sari store? Kasi kung hindi siya available sa tindahan, hindi siya magbibenta. Right? So a critical success factor is presence. Right? Presence in different selling channels. Okay? Kung hindi available in that selling channel, hindi magbibenta. Right? And that is the characteristic of the aftermarket um, division, right? Or that segment. No? Bakit? Bakit yun yung characteristic ng aftermarket? Since retail yan, kailangan available sa consumers. Yung OEM, hindi kailangan readily available. Kailangan lang ma-deliver on time. Kasi usually, ang mangyayari sa OEM mag-order muna yung customer. Pag nag-order, gagawin mo, and then you deliver on time. So, kailangan lang the manufacturing processes are really in place, no? So that you can deliver on time. But you don't need extra inventory, technically, right? Kasi wala ka namang inaabangan. Usually, large orders yan. So, pwedeng planuhin ang production. Okay? So, yun yung fundamental differences between the OEM and EM markets or segments. Very typical for us to understand or have footing or good idea about the differences in the two markets so that we can understand later how we can ensure that they're accountable for their kung ano man yung accountabilities nila within the organization. Okay? Sige. So we leave this for now, and then let's go to the next topic, and we'll come back to this later. Okay. My next topic is let's pull out another teka lang I think something wrong sa ating pagalaw. Okay, let's now go to the next topic. Okay. My next topic is the organization structure of the company. So let's describe. Wait lang. Before we go to the organization structure pala, let's define the sales composition. Sorry, ay sulat ko lang ulit yung kanina. OM, AM, because we'll go back to this. So, ability to innovate, deliver on time, and controlling costs. Availability of parts, and what's the other one? Price and quantity. Price and quantity of parts. Nakikita niyo ba yung sinusulat ko? Just checking.
Yes po, sir.
Okay. So those are the critical success factors. Okay. Before we go to the org structure, let's discuss the sales composition. So ano ang composition ng sales ng OEM? Ano nangyayari dito sa akin? So, bakit siya nabura? Wait lang technical difficulties. I'll probably just go to okay, dito na lang tayo sa Samsung. Ulit, sorry. Critical success factors, right? For OEM and for aftermarket. So again, for OEM, it is on time, controlling costs. For AM, availability, price, and quality. Okay. Okay. Sales composition. What's the sales composition um of the company? Yes, Miss Paraiso.
Hello,
So
sir.
OEM.
Am I audible, sir?
Yep.
So for OEM, sir, 130 million was contributed by the ignition parts division, and then 100 million from the transmission parts division, and then 90 million for the engine parts division.
Mm-hmm.
For AM, sir, the AM division, that's 180 million sales from AM.
Okay. A very critical component of the sales composition is that there are internal sales, right? How much is internal sales?
Internal sales, sir, amount to 100 million.
100 million. Okay. So the total sales is 500 million. Okay. Of which 100 million is internal sales. 400 million is external sales. Right? So, kung tutuusin, yung OEM, AM, OEM, ang AM sales, 180 million, right? How much is the OEM sales? That is 320 million, parang total 500. Tama ba? However, yung OEM, meron siyang 100 million na internal sales to H2AM. So, this is actually only 220 million and 180 million. This is the external sales. Okay? Tama ba? Because yung 100, alam mo naman, intercompany eliminations yan. Right? If you look at the sales structure. Diba? So ito yung sales structure niya. Bakit merong 100 na intercorporate sales? According to the case, ano raw yun? Why? Why is it existing? Yes, Dean.
Hi, sir. Based on my understanding po, yung supplier po ng AM division for the parts na binibenta niya is the OEM, ay yung ano po, yung parts division po mismo. So, yung since yung tapos na-mention po sa case na parang ang inaalaw lang daw po ng management to be the supplier for the AM division is the parts division po. So, kaya nangyayari po yung intercorporate sales po.
Okay, that's correct. So there are intercorporate sales. Why? Because OEM and parts division is the exclusive supplier of the AM division. Right? So we know that AM division has to sell, right? However, wala siyang choice, kundi ang source niya, ang supplier niya ay ang mga OEM parts division. Okay? So we're just setting the stage with respect to the parang management control systems with respect to the AM division. Okay? So if you look at the sales composition, mas malaki yung OEM versus AM, pero when you remove internal sales, okay, actually almost 50-50 na sila. Ilan ba yan? 22 over 400 is how many percent? Titignan natin. So 22 over 40 is 55. So ang current split is 55-45% of external sales. Right? Even though, so yun, 55-45 ang split with respect to those two. Okay? So yeah. Again, let's leave it at that and we'll come back to that later. Now let's discuss the organization structure, okay, of a company. So let me just draw it here. No? So the org chart of the company is this. So it starts with the CEO. And then, meron siyang COO. Hindi ko na drawing yung iba, yung hindi relevant sa ating discussion. So there's the COO. After the COO, merong 4 divisions. Right? So meron kang VP for the aftermarket. Meron kang VP for the ignition parts. Meron kang VP for the transmission parts. VP for the engine parts. Right? And then, anong meron? For AM, meron dalawang pay department. Merong domestic department, saka may foreign department. Then for each of the OEM divisions, meron kang plant na department, saka meron kang sales department. So, ganoon ang sa lahat ng OEMs, ganoon ang org structure. Okay? So, that's the simplified org structure of the company. Okay? So, can we discuss, ano nga ba, bakit ka ba may sales bawat isa dito? Bakit hiwa-hiwala yung sales ng OEM? Sales department ng OEM? According to the case. Yes, Dean?
I think, sir, kasi each of the divisions are profit centers and are responsible for each of their own profits po. So,
Okay, but let's go more historical. Meaning, nakalagay sa case, may specific reason kung bakit may sales bawat isa eh. Yes, Verona.
According to the sales po, sir, kaya may sales po bawat isa dahil the different divisions po worked with different people. So, at saka bukod din po daw doon, 2 out of 3 nung OEM divisions, they were independent companies before they were acquired by Abrams. So parang nasanay na po sila to work on their own marketing.
Correct. So first reason is that, well, unahin natin yung second, no, na 2 out of the 3 divisions were independent companies that were acquired and therefore have their own organizations. So hindi na nila ginalaw yun. No, hindi nila kinonsolidate yung sales into one department. So, dalawa dito, hindi sinabi kung which one. So, kunwari ito, saka ito. These were acquired companies. And since they were acquired, merong sariling organization yun. Hindi na nila change yun. So, yung sales nun, sila pa rin yung nagsisell for ignition. Yung sales nun, sila pa rin yung nagbibenta for transmission. Okay? And didn't change it. So, that's the first reason. The second reason was, sinabi nila, different divisions work with different people in OEMs. Okay? Or different OEMs. Okay? So, ignition part, iba naman yung kausap ng mga sales na yan sa transmission parts and engine parts. Kasi iba-iba yung OEM manufacturers ng bawat isa. Okay? So there's no quote-unquote synergy, among the three. Okay? So that's the reason why they are sales departments here. Okay? Now, given the organization structure, let's apply one concept that we have learned, in our lessons, which is responsibility centers or responsibility structures or accountability structures. Based on the case, can you identify the different responsibility centers in your organization? Can someone identify that? Kasi sabi ko nga sa lesson, the org structure is not necessarily the accountability structure. Right? Diba? Pwedeng iba ang accountability structure or responsibility center structure versus the org structure. And let's try to determine kung ganun ba yung case here. Okay? So, can someone try to identify what are the responsibility centers in this organization. Hindi siya explicitly cited in the case, but I think you can deduce it based on the different different discussions, no, in the case. Anyone? Yes, Anna.
So can I try lang?
Sure, sure.
I think for responsibility centers, like under the different divisions, like the plants are separate responsibility centers. So like they're investment centers, but then
Mhm.
for sales, they're more on revenue centers. And then I think the AM division, since they're also evaluated based on ROI, they're seen as an investment center also.
Okay, so according to Anna, the AM division as a whole is an investment center. And then the plant, sabi mo ba, is an investment center. And then
Yes, sir.
the sales department here is a revenue center. And the same is true
Yes.
for all. So, sige, sulat ko muna. And then let's Okay, so ito daw yung responsibility centers in the organization. So let's discuss how you were able to deduce na yan ang mga responsibility centers in the organization. So let's start with the AM division. So why do you think investment center was the category of the responsibility center for AM division? So anyone can answer that. Pero okay lang, Anna, you can answer also. If you have something to say.
Oh, sorry, sir. So I'll just answer for AM division lang.
Okay,
For
sige.
AM division, like as I mentioned kanina, I think they're considered as an investment center because they're evaluated based on ROI, so return on investment. So even if parang most of their expenses come from like costs from the OEM divisions, they're still evaluated based on that.
So they're evaluated based on ROI. Okay. And actually, if you read the case, the plants are also evaluated based on ROI. Tama ba? Binanggit yun sa case. Plants are evaluated based on ROI. And because they are evaluated based on ROI, how do we say that it is an investment center? So remember, side note, na ang ROI is what? Profit over assets. Right? So if you are, yan ang computation ng ROI. So for example, profit is of course revenues minus expenses over assets. Okay, that's the amount, the return that you get out of the investment. If a company, so since you are in this organization, yung AM, no, is accountable for ROI, no, it means it is also okay, it is accountable to profit and to assets, right? So therefore, hindi siya simply a profit center kasi numerator lang yun eh, yung profit. Right? It is also accountable to the assets that it is employing. And that makes it an investment center. Okay? So, kung hindi siya accountable sa assets that it is employing, then AM will simply be a profit center. Okay? So, sidebar lang yun, side note. So, that's why we were able to conclude that these are investment centers because they're measured based on ROI, which includes management of profit and management of assets employed in the business. Okay. Yung sales, nakalagay din naman doon that their measure is revenues or sales. So these are the accountability structures within our organization. Okay. Do you have any parang observations on these responsibility centers? Do you think this is usual? If it is not usual, why is it not usual? In the traditional sense. No? For example, yung sales department, that's something that I will expect to be accountable to sales or to revenues. And therefore, naturally, they are revenue centers, right? But one thing that is quite peculiar in this case is plants are not usually investment centers, right? In the traditional sense, ang isang planta, ano ba ginagawa ng planta? Hindi mag-produce ng goods, mag-produce ng products. And usually they are not accountable to selling them, right? But in this case, the plants are given the responsibility that it should be sold, right? Kasi they're also accountable to revenues. Kaya nga sila naging investment center. Kasi pag investment center ka, ROI equals revenues minus expense over asset. You're accountable to all of these things. Obviously, a plant is accountable to its expenses, right? A plant may be accountable to the assets that it employs, but a plant is usually not accountable to its revenues. Kasi planta nga lang siya, hindi naman tayo magbibenta. And at the same time, there's a separate sales organization that is accountable for it. Okay? So this arrangement can be quite peculiar. It's not usual. Okay? And later, we'll check whether it makes sense or not. Okay? So how do we check whether it makes sense na investment center should be, plants should be investment centers? So we usually tag them to the measures, the critical success factors. Okay? Let's look at the critical success factors of the OEM business. Okay? So if you look at the critical success factors of the OEM business, ano-ano yon? Ability to innovate, deliver on time, controlling costs. Question. Okay. Are these key success factors aligned with the fact that plants are plants are investment centers? Ulit. My question is, sabi ito yung critical success factors raw of the OEM market. Tapos ang measure tuloy ng mga planta is ROI. The fact that the measure is ROI, it means that the category is they are investment centers. Okay. Do you think it makes sense based on the critical success factors of the OEM market? Yes, Rico.
I don't think it makes sense, sir. Not so much, because if the critical success factors are focused on, say, innovation, actually being the first, I don't think you're incentivized to innovate if you have to keep your return on investment in mind, because it's more of a financial measurement. So it adds constraints to your ability to, like, how well are you able to innovate in relation to the revenues that can generate.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other opinion on this matter? Let's gather your thoughts on this matter. So, ang sinabi ni Nico is, saan na ba ako magsusulat, ano? Bahin natin to. So, isang sinabi ni Nico is, yung innovation does not jive or with a financial measure. Tama ba? Or something like that. Like the ROI. Okay? Any other opinion on this matter? Or any other thoughts on my question? So ngayon, ang tinatry natin i-evaluate, bagay ba yung accountability, no, sa kanilang critical success factors? Kasi as I mentioned, kinoconnect ko yung two concepts. Okay? As mentioned, the critical success factor is the bridge for you to get to A and B. So ito dapat yung magawa mo so that you are able to implement strategy or you successful in the market. For you to be able to do that, there should be an accountability structure within the organization. Okay? Para ma-ensure na mangyayari itong mga to. Right? So ngayon, ang tanong is, yung bang napiling accountability structure for OEM wherein the plant is in charge of investments, meaning revenues, expenses, and assets, is that accountability structure able to capture the critical success factors? Para pag nagawa nila yung accountabilities nila, nagawa yung critical success factors, and therefore, supposed to be it will lead to strategy or proper strategy implementation. Okay, so that's what we are trying to do. So, yun yung tanong ko sa inyo. Any other opinions here with respect to the plant being an investment center? Whether it is compatible with the critical success factors. Yes, Kyla.
Hello.
Yeah.
So for plants as investment centers, in addition to what Nico said earlier about innovation, I also believe that since a plant is considered a production unit, there might be a better accountability structure used. For example, the engineered expense centers. So this is because it relates both the input in monetary terms and output in physical terms. And given that it's an OEM, the emphasis also has to be made on the actual product, the physical product sold to the market.
Okay, so what Kyla mentioned is that baka better na engineered expense center na lang plant, right? And because it is an engineered expense center, what's an engineered expense center again? Kyla, can you explain for everyone?
So an engineered expense center this is usually found in manufacturing operations, and it relates both the inputs in monetary terms to outputs in physical terms. This way, it's able to bridge the quality standards between the two.
Okay, so it relates input to output. So similar to, say, for example, having a standard cost or a standard relationship between the inputs and the outputs. Okay, okay, so ang suggestion ni Kyla, baka dapat engineered expense center na lang yung planta. Right? Sige, any other opinion? We'll evaluate all later. I will discuss all later. Any other opinion on this matter? Wala ba nag-agree na okay lang investment center pa rin yan? Just so we have different opinions. Okay. Wala sa inyong agree na mukhang investment center yung plant pwede. So mukhang wala. Okay. Pero hindi discuss pa rin natin yan. Dahil syempre, kailangan merong difference in opinion. Okay. So, any other opinion on this matter? Nana? Or magtatawag ako? Isa pa siguro, kasi dalawa lang yan. Wala? Sige, tatawag ako ha. Christiana Limanalata, are you here? What are your thoughts on this? Are you here? I'm going to check and participant, please. Okay, mukhang wala siya dito.
Sir, am I audible?
Ito pala. Okay.
Sorry.
Game.
Wait lang, sir. Hindi kita marinig. Wait lang. Sorry.
Hello?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Sorry if ever you hear jingles sa background. Medyo maingay. For me, sir, I completely agree with Kyla. I also agree na an engineered expense center is more appropriate. Pero I'm not sure also how um like
Mhm.
yung yung current na setup nila. I'm not sure how since you wanted a difference in opinion, I'm not sure how to agree with it also. Parang since yun nga, since I agree with Kyla, di ko sure what
Okay,
difference.
I'll call another person.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Buden, see? Any other opinion or any other thoughts on this matter? Andito ba siya? Mr. C, I don't think you're here. Yes, Anika.
Hi, sir. I guess a differing opinion or like a point that they could consider on why an investment center would be appropriate is the controlling costs success factor. So especially since a lot of the sales composition is also internal, they would have to consider that as well. And because if they want to sustain the fact that most of what they'll be, I mean, of where AM is sourcing their products are from the OEM, then maybe it would make sense also the fact that it's an investment center.
Okay, again, can you summarize that? Investment center because of controlling costs, right? That's one.
And
What else did you mention?
since they supply the products used by AM,
Mm-hmm. And how
they
is
would
that? Sige.
to be price competitive as well.
Okay. Sige, let's discuss that later. Summer?
Hi, sir. So, I think I would also agree with the plant being an investment center just because each of these plants are highly specialized. So that means that the managers there that are assigned to that specific plant know more than the people outside of their department. So that is like one of the advantages of an investment center where decentralization would give more control to these local managers over if they want to buy or invest or sell assets that could improve their processes. So since these or like the lower managers, have more control over maybe like R&D or maybe like how to improve their machinery so that they could make more parts, more innovation. I think it's appropriate that these plants are investment centers.
Okay. Sige, let's try to, given these, no, let's try to evaluate first yung investment center. No? Kasi ito yung current. No? So, if you're an investment center, as mentioned by Summer, no, I think this is a critical aspect of being an investment center. Kasi if you're an investment center, there's a lot of decentralization involved. No? And because you're accountable to profits and asset investments, mas maraming decision, no, at the plant level than at the higher levels of the organization. Kasi at the plant level, they can decide where they can invest on in terms of assets. You know, what kind of assets to invest on because they're accountable to it. You know, accountable to asset employment within the plant. And profits also, they're accountable to it. You know, pag investment center. Let's look at the critical success factor and try to make sense whether this is something that that are captured by the fact that the plant is an investment center. Okay, number one, controlling cost obviously is covered by being investment center. So kung ikaw yung planta, kung investment center ka, you care about controlling costs because of this portion, right? You are trying to minimize expenses so that you can bump up your return on investment. right? So obviously the last one is compatible with the plant being an investment center. For the first one, ability to innovate, ito yung actually, I think, nagko-connect sa point ni Summer, no, na because managers on the ground know more about the organization, know more about the needs of the customers because ang sales pakababa rin eh. Nasa kanila yung sales. And so therefore, mas may pulso sila on what are the needs of the customers. And therefore, they should be able to innovate. And for them to innovate, um, they should also be allowed to invest resources, right? Innovation necessitates resources. Kailangan may resources so that you can innovate. And once you innovate, sometimes you invest in assets so that you can implement those innovations. And so therefore with that, parang medyo related. No? Or medyo nako-cover ng being an investment center yung fact that we have to innovate. Okay? However, hindi rin ganun ka-clear. No? O hindi ganun ka-apparent. So, anong sabi ko? Yung ability to innovate, let's see. The ability to innovate is compatible with having resources at their employ so that they can invest, right, in resources. Pero, so that's a positive. Pero dahil they are measured on ROI, okay, they might be unwilling to invest in innovation with no immediate ROI impact. Again, dahil ang measure nila ROI, okay, and they are required to innovate. So, dahil they have control over the resources, they can invest in innovation projects. However, dahil ROI yung measure nila, hindi naman lahat ng innovation project mataas agad ang ROI impact. Right? So sometimes when you establish an innovation, merong glide path. Right? Mababa muna ang sales because of that innovation, pero nag-improve naman. No? Pero kung ang measure lang nila is the ROI in that specific year, they might not be incentivized, right, to innovate kaagad. Right? Because baka mamaya hindi pa enough yung sales to cover the additional investment, bababa yung total ROI. Even though you know na 2 years down the road, it will be fantastic ROI. No? That it's so high that it's fantastic, but we have to wait for 2 years. So they might be incentivized to disincentivized to invest in those kinds of innovation if ROI mismo yung measure. Okay? So those are pros and cons. No? And so I probably can conclude na it supports ability to innovate more or less. Okay? Next, deliver on time. Okay? Ito bang deliver on time is related to the fact that we are an investment center? The plant is an investment center. What do you think? When you deliver on time, what do you want to do? You want to make sure that your production processes are efficient, right? Kasi dapat walang delay sa production, right? At dahil walang delay sa production, dapat mag-commit ka na lalabas sa planta mo yung goods at a certain point in time para mabenta agad. Right? That's exactly what deliver on time means. Ang mangyayari is your sales department will say na, si Toyota, si Rolls-Royce may order na 10 million pieces 5 days from now. So ikaw, planta, ang responsibility mo is lumabas yan in 5 days. Make sure that your operations are so good that it goes out on the 5th day so that we can deliver immediately. Okay? So, in that sense, the plant is related to sales. Nag-gets mo ba ako? Kasi kailangan lumabas yung goods at the time that sales needs it. Okay? Kumbaga, fulfillment. order fulfillment ang responsibility ng planta, no? So in this case, it might be related to revenues, but we cannot really control revenues, no? The plant um, cannot really control revenues. Why? Kasi hindi naman nila control kung sino yung order, gaano karami. No? So dito tayo medyo bumabagsak. Kasi yung revenues here are not related to delivery on time. It is related, but it is not controllable. Right? Even though OEM can deliver on time, pero hindi niya naman niya ma-influence kung gaano karami yung order. It all depends on the sales department. Okay? So in this case, baka itong revenue na portion ng ROI hindi controlled, uncontrollable. No? Uncontrollable. And because it's uncontrollable, it has an impact on the motivation of people. Right? So if revenues is something that the plant cannot control, then baka hindi effective yung ROI as a performance measurement tool. Okay? Right? So yung sinabi kanina na production, that OEM is a production unit, and it relates to input to output, we try to check that versus the different critical success factors in the organization. No? And you're able to say na, they can control P, they can control assets, but they can control this. So baka hindi sila dapat structured as an investment center. Okay? Pero actually, you can still structure the plant as an investment center. How? Let's go to the org structure. Okay? Pwede kasi kayong mag-design ng transfer pricing mechanisms. Okay? If you really want the plant to be an investment center, okay, dapat bigyan mo siya ng ganitong powers. The plant can sell to the sales department, and they can also sell to the AM department. Currently kasi, di ba, nagpo-produce to. They produce for both OEM and for AM. Right? Pero dahil itong sales department na to, naka-lodge dito sa plant, okay, mas priority ng plant na magbigay ng inventory sa OEM kesa sa AM. Kasi sabi nga nila, sa case captive market raw yung AM. And they are not the priorities. Diba? Dinescribe sa case na parang pag may excess capacity lang, saka bibigyan ng inventory si AM. No? Pero kung i-structure natin yung operations ng company na plant, you have revenue responsibility, you have an investment center responsibility. And since you have the revenue responsibility, you can actually decide if you want to sell to your sales department or you want to sell to your AM department. Eh di magko-compete ngayon to, itong dalawang ito. Right? And therefore, you can structure the responsibility as if the plant is a responsibility center. Is an investment center. Okay. So ngayon, ano yung magiging motivation kay plant? Mamimili siya ngayon. Saan mo maximize ang ROI ko pag nagbenta ako kay AM or kay OEM sales? AM sales or OEM sales? Right? Then, nag-iiba yung mindset ni plant. Right? Dapat strategic na ako ngayon. Dapat mas maganda, kung saan mas maganda yung presyo. Right? So, magkakaroon na ngayon ng transfer pricing negotiations between the two. And that instills a maximize ROI na mindset for the plant. Okay? So, those are things na pwedeng i-design. So, ngayon, kung hindi mo i-design na ganyan, I agree with Kyla na baka pwedeng bahin natin. Oops. na ito, engineered expense center. Tapos ito, revenue center. Okay? Pag ginawa mo ganyan yung accountability structure, the plant will just be accountable for expenses, right? The sales department will be accountable for revenues. Sino kayo ng accountable for asset employment? Pag kailangan mag-expand, sinong nagde-decide? No? So someone has to decide that. Someone has to be accountable for the efficiency of assets. So pwede mo namang gawin, pag ganun, you can design na, VP ng IP, ng ignition parts. You are accountable for the whole thing. So yung ROI, at this level, pwede i-measure. So yung VP, kailangan niyang i-manage ito, si plant, kailangan niya i-manage yung field, and probably you can buo ka ng isa pang organization. Say may meron kang asset management group. Okay? At siya ang in charge sa asset maintenance. Okay? Right? So, ito para tong expense center din yan, more or less. No? Pero ang magmamanage ng asset, at the whole, at the ROI level, is at this level. Okay? ROI. So I'm just illustrating that there are many ways on how to design accountabilities in an organization, right? And all of those accountability design, okay, ang ultimate objective nila at the end of fulfill the objectives of the organization. Now, last before we go, kasi 11:30 lang tayo. Last before we go is let's look at the critical success factors in the AM market. Naman, okay? So if you look at the AM market, what are the critical success factors? Oops. Availability of parts, and price and quality. Question, lahat ba ito controllable by AM division? The answer is no, right? They don't have any control on pricing. Why? Effectively, they don't have any control on pricing. Bakit? Kasi wala naman silang choice kung kanino pwedeng bumili. They are beholden to the costing of the OEM division. Right? Wala silang choice. Hindi sila makabili ng inventory from somewhere else because they are mandated to buy from the OEM division. So, price takers lang sila. Right? And so they could not really influence price. They also cannot influence quality. Kung ano yung quality na bigay ng OEM, wala akong choice. Benta ko na lang yun. Right? I can insist, pero hindi naman ako yung priority customer. I'm just a captive customer, so hindi nila ako iniintindi masyado. And lastly, availability of parts. Hindi nga ako priority o hindi nga ako equal footing with the other customers of the OEM. Okay. So actually, based on the current structure, hindi talaga investment center ang AM because they could not control a lot of things. Okay? Ang AM, so yung ROI is revenues minus expense over assets. Actually, they cannot control a lot of these items, right? Expense, they cannot control it, right? Why? Because isa lang yung kanilang supplier. Beholden sila, price takers in the market. Revenues, they cannot control revenues. Revenues is price times quantity, right? Yung price, hindi nila control masyado or very little flexibility because they're just price takers. Quantity, they are also dependent only on the amount or quantity provided by the OEM divisions. Right? So, wala talaga silang control over a lot of things related to ROI. So, hindi masyadong compatible yung pagiging investment center nila. Okay? Baka nga, kung akong tanongin nyo, baka revenue center lang, right? Baka they can be a revenue center tapos ang measure nila is not entirely increase in sales, but the ability to sell all inventories that are allocated to them, right? Pwedeng ganun lang, right? Pero pag ganun lang, baka hindi ma-achieve yung aspirations ng organization. What is the aspiration of the organization according to the case? 50% of sales comes from AM division. Yan ang sabi nila na aspiration nila. No? Pero hindi naman nila ini-empower yung aftermarket, no, to be able to have control over its revenues and control over expenses. So therefore, kung gusto talaga nilang ma-achieve ito, and this is the organizational objective, no, not to for sales to be 50%, of external sales coming from the AM division, pwede na lang i-change ang policy. Right? Change the policy na exclusive supplier. Kasi that will open up a lot of possibilities. And pag ginawa mo yan, then ROI is equal to revenues minus expense over assets, right? Pag ginawa mo yan, tinanggal mo na yung pagiging exclusive supplier, the division will now have control over expenses, will now have better revenue control, and therefore, and also have control over the assets that it can employ because they can stock up inventories if they want. In that case, then, pwede na siyang maging investment center. Okay. So, this case is trying to explain or trying to illustrate that responsibility centers can be designed in a lot of ways. Okay? But at the end of the day, ang gusto mong end goal nun is that when you sum up all accountability, you know that it contributes to the total, to the implementation of the strategy of the whole organization. Okay? So, we'll probably stop here. No, hindi ko na ma-discuss yung Netflix. Ganun din nangyari kanina. I mean, hindi ko rin na-discuss because mas mahaba yung discussion here. So, do you have any questions for me or any comments or anything to say about this case? La? No reaction? Okay, so if there's none, tapos na tayo. The next time I'll see you will be after the reading break, which is the first set of cases. Or before the reading break, again, we have a session, another session like this. Okay, so I'll see you then. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.